Hello, friends. We're just going to wait a few seconds for people to join in. I can see that some people are been waiting for the live to start. We're going to start in a second. I'm just going to check, make sure that, yeah, I think everything's coming through fine, I guess. Yeah, if somebody can tell me if the sound is okay. Seems like it's fine. So we're just going to wait a few seconds for people to join in. It takes time for people to come into the stream. But I can see it here on Facebook. It seems like it's working fine. Okay, I'm gonna start. If you're not hearing me, please let me know. If somebody could write on one of the streams on YouTube or on Facebook, I think it's fine. Can you hear me? Can somebody give me a sign that the picture and the sound is fine? Somebody say that. I have a feeling that my sound is not coming through. Is that so? Is that the case? Can somebody tell me about sound? Can you hear me now? Could somebody say if you can hear me now? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Okay, I'm going to... Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. We're gonna do our talk for today, and as you've seen on the notice, I'm going to be talking to. No, I'm not seeing the comments. Somebody's saying that. Do I see the comments? I should be seeing the comments, but it sounds fine. Okay, so they're telling me everything's fine. We're going to be talking to Dinuk Wijeratne. So I'm just going to bring Dinuk on and then say a few things and then start. Well, hello, sir.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good, thank you. It's very good to see you.
In sunny California.
Yes, and yeah, Dinuk, it's very good to see you.
And you, Shahin.
Yes, I was very excited to see what you put out the other day, and I called you right away. And I just want to tell our friends we're streaming this through Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, but then we'll be keeping it there and talking about this again and again. Dinuk Wijeratne, Sri Lankan-born Canadian Dinuk Wijeratne, is a Juno and multi-award-winning composer, conductor, and pianist who has been described by the Toronto Star as an artist who reflects a positive vision of our cultural future, and by the New York Times as exuberantly creative. His boundary-crossing work sees him equally at home in collaborations with symphony orchestras, string quartets, tabla players, and DJs, and takes him to international venues as poles apart as the Berlin Philharmonic and the North Sea Jazz Festival. Fascinated by how creativity exerts an influence across disciplines, Dinuk was featured as a lead character in What Would Beethoven Do?, the 2016 documentary about innovation in classical music. Dinuk is also a creativity consultant. helping creators across disciplines embrace their uniqueness and live their best creative lives. So Dinuk, let's just start right there about this creativity and consulting about it, and what you put out the other day. So please.
Well, this started because for the last few years now, I've had this idea to start some kind of consultancy so I could consult for or coach or mentor people who want to get their creative process to where they aspire it to be. And because I've just always been fascinated about creativity and how it works, trying to figure it out myself, trying to figure out how to optimize my own process. And I also discovered that I got most excited by learning about creativity from people who necessarily weren't musicians. So I love hearing it about across disciplines. And I think that's how I best like to help people, by taking them out of this kind of narrow focus and trying to figure out, how to optimize the process. And so, I mean, the pandemic, ironically, has been a good time for me to do this, because while I'm composing for half of the day, because I still have a lot of pieces to write. As you know, I'm a performer also, and those performances have been canceled. So I have that time on my hands, shall we say. And so this is really taken off. I'm really enjoying it.
So what is it? You're calling it?
Well, I consult I'm a creative consultant is what I call myself.
I'm talking about the guide that you put out.
Oh, the guide is called Define Your Artistic Voice. And it outlines a strategy that I've used for many, many years. It's become very regular now in my life, for how to define either my artistic voice as I'd like to hear it at a certain point in my life, or as a more kind of local exercise that I actually use before I plan every single piece that I do. So I'm actually going to do it.
A to-do guide.
It is.
Yes. So it's I'm going through it. It's very step by step. It starts on very simple terms, and so take us through it. Why you're calling it that?
Well, I should add that when I have Q&A sessions with groups of students, or if I'm talking to a bunch of creators or something, and this used to happen, when I used to lecture at universities, right? So I would travel to places to do gigs and shows, and I end up, giving a lecture at the local university, wherever it is. There's always someone who says, how do I define my artistic voice? I feel like it's emerging, and I'm absorbing influences from here, there, and everywhere, which is great. But how do I consciously define my voice? And I think that's an interesting topic, because I think it can happen in a very organic way. And certainly if you're a young artist, if you're in your early 20s, and when I was in my 20s, I moved to New York City. I was taking in all these influences from different places. Of course, a great deal of it happens organically. But when I moved to Nova Scotia, when I moved to Canada, and I started working professionally as an artist, and then as I started to feel that my voice was maturing, I had to be more proactive and conscious about the process. And that's what I'm trying to say in the guide, that if you want to start to become more proactive about it and really isolate what's important to you artistically, here's a way to do it. That's essentially the basic premise of the guide.
So something is not clear to me, Dinuk. You're saying defining your artistic voice, but I usually understand it as finding your artistic voice. Is there a difference between these two?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So, when you say finding your artistic voice, that can happen automatically, completely organically as you go through life. It does, I have to say, it does depend on the fact that you have the courage to be authentic as an artist. And that's another topic that comes up a lot. So what I mean by that is, are you truly creating the way you want to either hear the music or see the art? Are you being true to yourself? And so I ask myself, am I creating the music not according to how anyone expects it to sound, but how Dinuk really wants it to sound? So that's number one. And
So
and so
essentially being happy with the work that you've done.
exactly. I think, regardless of your technical stage, I think you want to be as authentic as possible, because that is really stepping into courage in its best sense, And to use myself as an example, I grew up in Asia with an exclusively Western education. So I'm constantly trying to reconcile multiple identities in my work. And yes, this happened organically, but being a person who likes systems as well, I reached a point in my artistic maturity, probably in my late 20s, where I thought, okay, I need a more sort of proactive way of now not just allowing myself to find my voice, but how do I define it? And so what I talk about in the guide is you can use all kinds of fun, creative ideation strategies to look for connections. That's essentially what it is. You first have to be very upfront about everything you like, as an artist, as a human being. And that's a lot of fun. But then it gets more strategic when you start to look for connections between those things. And one of the examples is I used is, of course, I wrote that tabla concerto when I was in Halifax, and it went on to be a big success. And just the point of intersection between tabla, which really had never seen a symphony orchestra, and a Western classical orchestra, finding that connection is just one way of exercising, one way of, really defining your voice and asking questions, the questions that you want to ask yourself as an artist and as a human being.
Dinuk, I want to come back to this issue of authenticity and finding that authentic voice, this conversation, especially for me and you, with a different background from where we in the space that we work in and the culture that we work in. But let's go back to the beginning of the guide. One of the most important things that you're emphasizing is that before anything, one needs to set themselves in the right state of mind.
Yes.
Please take us, because I think that's doesn't matter how much attention I pay to the rest of it. If I don't get this, I don't think I'm capturing what you're saying. So please take us through that part slowly. What do you mean by that?
Yes, that's a great question, because, as human beings, as we mature, as the intensity of our sort of education ramps up, I think we become more critical thinkers, which is good. We place a very high value on logical thinking, but we perhaps distance ourselves from that kind of state of mind that we had when we were kids, right? So that is a more sort of, they actually call it a more kind of divergent thinking state. It's when you're freer, you're free from judgment, you're in more of a play state. And the reason I say that it's very important to get in the right frame of mind is that when you start to brainstorm ideas, it's absolutely crucial that you suspend the very judgment that you've been training all these years to develop, right? So I'm not saying that that kind of judgment is bad, not at all, because in order to become a better artist, your judgment has to be extremely authentic and laser focused. But the point I'm trying to make is you've got to know when to use it and when to suspend it. And when you're starting to brainstorm and essentially, when you're starting to define your artistic voice on a more proactive level, and you have to be kind of gentle with yourself as a human and just really look within, you don't want something that's going to censor yourself every time you try to say something, and that's crucial, because I think as we move through society, we tend to evolve little ways of criticizing and censoring our own creative judgment.
Well, I think me and others, we would like to hear exactly what is it you do. I mean, me, to stay as a naive artist, or the baby, when our breathing was in our stomach, and before we got scared and things changed, as you're saying. I listen to the music that my kids listen to. I try to stay on top of the pop culture and things that are changing, and I meditate. I do nothing. I just sit. What do you do? How do you
Actually,
get yourself in that state of mind, the right state of mind?
Actually, I do a little bit of all of those things, except I don't have kids yet, unfortunately. but whenever we do have kids, I think I have a feeling, I would end up like anyone else. I think really marveling at the way they can connect with their creativity.
Mm-hmm.
As human beings, we were all born creative. It's not a gift that some people have and some people don't. Very, very famous educators have said quite rightly that maybe we are almost educated out of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
and what they mean by that is we just become more judgmental. As we exercise the judgment, it helps us do certain things, but it takes us away from that kind of sense of childlike curiosity. So one of the things I really try to do is police myself, like every time I'm in a creative session, if I'm composing and I've set aside some time. And by the way, I'm very compartmentalized with the time I try to do that. I really try to get in this kind of positive emotional state where hopefully I can pretend like it's play, like it's playtime. And I find that it goes really best when I can get into that headspace. And like I said, I'm not trying to throw out the judgment. It's just that then you know how to switch it on when you need it. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe in what you're saying, and I try to stay on course with what you're saying. Abandoning. I maybe that's not what you're saying, but I actually actively try to abandon logic sometimes for myself.
Yeah.
But now I want to play the advocate here for those who see it differently, and that's not what you're saying is not what our education system is saying. They're saying you sit down, you learn this stuff, and that's all there is to it. There's nothing else. There's logic, there's science, and there's nothing else. There's nothing else. It's just you learn about these things around you, and that's how you're supposed to do it. But that's not what you're saying.
Yes, I believe you're right in the sense that I think, so for instance, as a musician, I spent many years in very venerable musical institutions learning technique, right? And to this day, I really try to perfect my technique. You absolutely need the best technique you can. But I think what I've found is, when you're a music student and you spend so much time focusing on technique, I think, you're in danger of also missing the big picture, which is what might be happening to your mindset. And I think this kind of curious play state that you need to hang on to, maybe I think that gets overlooked, and in some of these infrastructures, maybe we don't remind students often enough that you need to maintain that, right? So,
and I believe in the guide, you're calling that part consciously identifying issues, and you're underlying consciously identifying.
Yes. So you do have to be very, very conscious about how you're reacting to things. So I think, you want to be objective. You want to be objective about whether you're being authentic. That's huge. I'm constantly, almost on a moment-to-moment basis, when I'm creating and I'm composing and I'm improvising, I'm kind of checking in with myself to make sure that I'm doing it for me, and not because some little voice in my head says, from the past, shall we say, says, oh, well, maybe it should sound like this instead.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that whenever I speak to young artists and students, authenticity is probably the number one most pressing question. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I'm very I'm excited to get to this issue of authenticity, but I I have a few more things I want to get to before
Sure.
we go to this. And um, the way you're mapping it out in the guide, is this basically working backwards, getting to the person that we had lost connection with, or is it just finding who that person is now, or is there a difference between the two?
I think I would say probably the second one. I've never actually, come to think of it, I never thought about it as working backwards, because you're evolving as a human.
I'm just saying, from the way you had mapped it out in the graphic that you put in the guide.
Yeah, I don't see it as
writing down this, writing down that, writing this down, writing that, yeah, and putting it together, and then going from the center or coming back.
Yeah, I don't actually, to be honest, I don't see that as a kind of reverse engineering process, but I think the more you do it, the better you get at checking in with the real you as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think it's very important to try and label any kind of pressures you might be feeling, to maybe not acknowledge a certain influence in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So as a young artist, when I remember the time specifically, I think I was 19 years old. I had a very Western education, but of course I'd grown up in the Middle East, and I was exposed to all of these Asian cultures and the music. I remember when it started to come out, and I don't think there was anyone who could really help me find the intersection of those things. And that's what I'm encouraging people to start being more conscious of, which is like, if you feel it coming out, can this perhaps be a system where you can identify, label, and then help kind of expedite the process of how these things are going to meet anyway?
Consciously identifying.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And on a more, I think I say later on, on a more project to project basis, it's more appropriate that you consciously make connections between things. So, for instance, I'm going to write a piece I'm very much looking forward to, which is the test piece for the Banff string quartet competition. And this week I'm really going to have a lot of fun, really kind of taking stock of where I am at this particular point in October 2020 as an artist, all the things I'm listening to, all the things I love, and how could they interact? Like, how are they particularly coming together with Dinuk at this point in his life?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like to do that quite proactively.
Dinuk, I think I would like to hear, I think everybody would like to hear a more specific example. Like, let's say you're writing a bridge in middle of a song, writing a passage. I mean, you pick whatever. Uh, and you feel like things are not connecting. And then you have the guide. How, give me like a practical example of how would you do it?
Sure.
You come to a stop and things are not working. You need to center yourself and bring it back together.
Yeah, what I would do is I would take a step back a little bit, and let's say I'm designing a piece, or I am, let's say, just getting started, and I'm trying to figure out what the piece is wanting to say or what the piece is about. So this for me is huge, because I just think I say to people, you know, with every piece you write, with every song you write, you want, the most successful ones are the ones that have a kind of clear message. They have a clear message and they deliver their message very clearly. You can't make whatever you're writing all things to all people. It's just impossible. It's like trying to watch 10 movies at the same time. You can't do it, right? You know, you're living this snapshot.
Some people
right?
do.
Yeah, you can. I guess you can try. To use an example from a piece that was very successful for me last year, I actually think it might be one of my best pieces. I wrote this piece based on a Sri Lankan dance form called Vannam, and I was invited to write a piece for piano and strings, and for me to conduct. So I would conduct from the piano, and I just started by thinking, could this be an opportunity to explore this thing that I've always wanted to explore? And what I say in the guide is, at this point, just lay out on the table or on a piece of paper all the things that you think are coalescing at that point. So for me, it was piano, string orchestra, conducting, Sri Lanka, Vannam. Which Vannam? It was actually a beautiful composition. The traditional composition was about the majesty of the elephant, right? And I remember just loving elephants as a child, right? So you've got this kind of weird collection of words that maybe don't make any sense together. And I also had more words, like the word dance, which is hugely important to me in my life. And then you just spend some time digging and looking for the connections, right? That's one of the things. And I'll say something about that. And that's because creativity really thrives, innovation really thrives at the intersection between two things, right? So what I say to people is, don't put pressure on yourself expecting an amazing idea to just drop out of the sky. Just take the idea you have, even if you think it's not good yet, and try and look for an intersection between something very simple, right? Just something that just might come totally out of left field. And when your brain starts to loosen up by looking for the connection between something random and something you actually end up getting some interesting ideas. And this is really, if you look at the history of great inventions, they exist at the intersections of sometimes very ordinary things, So that's one thing. You start to look for intersections. The second big point that I make is that you look beyond, or I say behind, if you want to use that metaphor. You look behind an idea for its value. And what I mean by that is, a value is something that doesn't sound like a concrete idea. It's more of a principle or a belief that's important to you, the artist. So for instance, if I ask Shahin, what is your value? Because I know you like dance and theater, right? So let's say you like dance. What is the value behind dance? You might say something. you might say that it's there is a kind of physical, you love the physical, visceral sense of dance. But if you ask me what I love, I might say, oh, well, yes, I do get that. But for me, it's all about this notion of balance, right? So I might say, a good dancer for me makes you forget that gravity exists, you know? And so
basically going back to building all of this on the energy that is authentic to this self.
Yes, because different people will identify different value systems behind the same things, like dance and music. So music might mean something entirely different to me than it means to you, right? Even though we both love music. And once you start to look behind all of the things you love for all these value systems, it makes you really connect with yourself and and shall we say, deepen your knowledge of who you are as an artist and as a human. And that's something I really love.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's break this down. So what is authentic to you when you say authentic? I mean, at the same time, we have to accept this fact that for artists of color in Western world, this whole issue of being authentic has been politicized and racialized so much. I mean, everywhere I turn, it's around me, and I can't escape it. But at the same time, I do my work for me. I'm one of those people that believe that it's art for art's sake, and it has brought me to a lot of issues and conflicts with a lot of people from many different sides of the spectrum. And saying what is authentic to me, it seems like always has to be a known authenticity because of the color of my skin, because of my accent, because of my name, where I come from, all of those things. What is it to you?
Well, I think at the fundamental level, it is to shed any preconceived notions about who you think you should be, according to what other people have told you over the course of your life, and really, on the deepest level, get in touch with who you really want to be and who you really are, right? And I'm sure you've heard of Ken Robinson. You know, he has the most watched TED Talk. I'm a huge fan of his. He's that education guru, you know.
Yeah, I watch him.
Yeah, he's and he lives in California, actually. Yes. And he has a lovely book called The Element. You know, he calls he uses the word the element, finding your element, meaning finding that kind of zone in which you just thrive as an artist, right? And he has a phrase in that book where he calls it circles of constraint. And what he means by that is social circles that may have constrained you into creating in a non-authentic way for whatever reason, right? And so from the time we're born, of course, the first circle of constraint could be your family. Then it could be your immediate friends. As you grow up and you go to school, it could be peer groups, whatever your academic institution might be thinking. Then as you emerge as a professional, it could be workplace or industry constraint, for example. So let's say, I'll just give you one example. If you're in the music industry, do you feel a certain pressure from other corners of the music industry to write music in a different way? I hear this a lot, right?
Yeah.
So that's an example of how you feel a certain pressure from a particular social circle of constraint, right?
Absolutely, and you hear it from the industry a lot. You say, now you're saying music. They say, well, these days people are listening to this type of music. Can you write something like this? And people start thinking that, okay, well, right now I need to get into the scene. And when I'm in the scene, then perhaps I can do the music that I really like. And for a lot of people, then it's too late. And you've done, a whole bunch of work that you originally wasn't your voice. Uh, but that's the pressure that we see all over, in theater, in film, in music, um, and really it starts from early years of school system.
Yes, it does. And you know, I've just had so many discussions with so many artists over the years, Shaheen, of different age groups, that now my advice to people is just flat out, just be an authentic creator from the moment you start creating, because you don't want to regret having written a piece or produced a project that just didn't feel like you at a fundamental level.
But
Yeah.
what do you say to that when the system that is all over, from east to west to north to south, um, very strong in the Western world. I mean, because of the majority of the resources are here. But that, first you need to finish your education, learn everything that is out there, make some money, and then you can be, whatever you want to be. I mean, what do you say to that?
I mean,
it's easy to say to somebody who, hasn't got out there yet. And most of them don't get it anyway, because they're still, it's one teacher, Dinuk, out of 100 other teachers in university, or that are saying differently. But that's a big pressure from the society. I mean,
it's huge. It's huge.
it's huge. It's
and I
very
think
damaging, very, very disturbing.
I think if you're a teacher, and everyone at some point in their lives is in a position where they're teaching someone else,
Mm-hmm.
I would say to those people, ask yourself if you are stifling anyone's authenticity in any way, or are you teaching them the technique while allowing them to create what they're creating in any way they want,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what I try to do. And if you are the student, just try and develop a sense of when you spot that there might be a pressure. Mm-hmm. So identify those sources in your life, in your artistic life. The same way, to be honest, when you leave your family nest as a young person, when you go out into the world, to university, wherever, there is a kind of unraveling, isn't there? When you start to realize, oh, maybe some of my values might be different to my family's, for example, right? Or maybe they're the same, but in many cases, some people say, well, I like this, and instead for the last 20 years or 18 years, my family was saying I should have liked that instead. And so we start to discover who we really are and how we're unique. So I'm just trying to encourage people to try and spot that, to try and be in touch with that, and really identifying your values is a big part of that.
And also, I think perhaps the bigger issue here is, before the school, is the parents and the family structure. And a lot of us, we're trying to make our kids to what we couldn't be or we didn't achieve. And I think that's where the problem starts. We put it in the minds of our kids that they have to be a certain thing, and it may be opposite to their authentic energy.
Exactly. And I think the best you can
and then
do,
they become the artist, or they become the teacher, and the cycle continues.
Exactly. And I think, the best we can do is encourage people or show people how to find individual fulfillment, right? As artists and human beings, and just remind ourselves that that fulfillment might not doesn't necessarily fit the definition that we have.
Absolutely.
And I got to study. I was very lucky. I have an Asian mother who, unlike so many Asian mothers, said that of course I can go into music, of course I can go into the arts. She didn't have a problem with it. I think some other Asian kids from Sri Lanka have not had that kind of encouragement. So that's one example of how the family could exert pressure. And then when I studied in the US with John Corigliano, who's an extremely famous composer, I still keep in touch with him now. Actually, he's in his 80s. One of the things that really defined his studio was that all the students sounded different. None of us sounded like each other. And I think I only now realize how powerful that is now that I have students,
And how lucky you were that you ended up with that teacher, because that's a very rare kind of teacher to say that, actually.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I tell this funny story that once I asked him, I said, I asked him for advice on how my style should sound. Okay. And so here he is, he's teaching me technique and he's teaching me how to design pieces, which I still love doing. But this one day I said, what do you think of my style, by the way? Like how the music sounds. And he gave this really vague answer, like he was like a politician trying to dodge a question. And so I asked him twice, and then he tried to dodge it for a second time. And when I asked him the question for the third time, he said, he just said, I really, honestly, if you must know, but really this is not important, And I actually left the lesson, to be honest, I felt a little shortchanged. Like I just thought, for someone who's so articulate, why did you dodge that question? And now a generation later, I just think that was just so smart because he didn't want there to be any pressure in the room whatsoever, knowing how much his students really respected him. He didn't want there to be any pressure that we should be writing music on his terms.
His terms. Yes.
We should be finding our own voice.
Yes.
And all he's doing is he's giving you the tools and he's being a facilitator. And that's essentially what I find myself trying to do now, is just be a facilitator so that you can allow someone's voice to just come out. And for them to embrace all the things that they really, really love, not the things that other people said, oh, well, you should love this.
Absolutely. When I go into rehearsal with the actors, the first thing I do every time we stop to continue to work on things, my first question to the actors is, how did that feel to you? Of course, I have my thoughts on what the character is, what the movement is, interpretation. We talk about those things, but the most important thing, I put the value on how they feel right after doing it.
I think
that's the most important part to me.
I think that's a beautiful question, and it's also beautifully phrased because, once again, the word feel connects us to the intuition. And I mean, there is no doubt that when Shahin is directing and the actors are working, that we're using all the technique that we have gained through experience. We're being very critical, but your question immediately snaps them back into an intuitive state.
Yes, because the question is not about whether you did this correctly or not. It's about how you as a person felt about that work.
Yeah. And does it feel right?
Yes.
I think that's great.
Yeah. Dinuk, I had question about seeking, but I think we covered it a lot. Covered it in different ways. But I'd like us to finish with that. Talk a little bit about that, because it's continuous. It never ends. I mean, as an artist, it never ends. When it ends, then you become a teacher, not just a teacher, but you become a teacher. Then you know it all, or you have believed that you know it all. Now you're teaching it. But seeking for an artist, does it end?
Never. I mean, it's a beautifully endless process. And I think the more you constantly feel like a student, the better. Because also, it's impossible that any of us and the world are fixed points. We're constantly in motion. And certainly if you say to an artist, you are not the artist you were last year, that's pretty obvious. But if you say to an artist, you are not precisely the same artist you were yesterday, that's also true. And so I think if you think that way, it helps you to be much more in touch with the moment. And when I opened the pad this week to plan that string quartet piece, I'm just going to be taking stock of where I am again at this point in my life with everything that's happening, and just acknowledging that I'm something constantly in motion.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for all of this.
Oh, my pleasure.
And thank you for sharing it. I mean, I'm gonna put we put the link to download the guide in different places, but I'm gonna put it with this post on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook.
Thank you, and I would love to hear people's feedback.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
I would love to hear what people think of it. Like if
absolutely, but and perhaps if there are comments or not, I think we need to come back and talk about this, because both me and you, we work in from an Eastern background in a Western world, and we talked about this a little bit the other day. We were talking on the phone about the Eastern influence, Eastern storytelling in our work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like us to come back and talk more about this.
Sure.
Because I think these conversations are very important to be out there and talked about more and more and more.
Sure.
At the same time, we're both from this new home for us, Canada, that is still trying to find this identity.
Mm-hmm.
And people like me and you were contributing to that identity, and I think artists of color need to take a bigger space within that conversation. And so we're going to talk more. I think there's a lot of things to be talked about when it comes to these issues. Thank you again. Dinuk, please tell us again, give us all the addresses and everything, your website, where people can find your work and also connect with you, and where they can download the guide for free.
Sure. There is actually a link on my Facebook page. Define Your Artistic Voice is right at the top, and if you just go there with one click, you can download it. Or I think
Dinuk Wijeratne with a W. Yeah, Dinuk Wijeratne with a W, because sometimes yes.
Yes, with
there are some Wijeratnes online with a V, and that's one of the ways I always, every time I want to search Dinuk, I make sure that I don't make that mistake. So I'm saying, and what is your other addresses on other social media stuff?
Instagram, I'm at Instagram, and the handle is Wijeratne Works. So it's my last name and Works, WORKS.
Okay.
And the guide is in the bio.
And is in the bio.
Yeah.
And your website?
Yes, it's dinukwijeratne.com.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. It's so great to see you.
It's very good to see you.
You too. You stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
Take care. Bye, Shahin.
Bye. Bye, Dinuk. Tomorrow, at the same time, we're going to be talking about the fishery situation again. But this time, we're going to hear from a few women from the community. As you know, there's been some trouble coming to the east coast of Canada, on that part of the Turtle Island, with the 1752 treaty between the Mi'kmaq and the Crown, and their fishing rights. People been threatened. Places have been put on fire. People have been locked up and held at captivity. Very ugly situation. We talked to a few people, a few Mi'kmaq the other day about this situation and how people are being terrorized. Tomorrow we'll talk with few women from the community. And I'm going to post about the rest of the week. We have something for Wednesday and Thursday. And yeah, and we're going to post them like this. Through StreamYard, I'm putting these things out. Right now, we're scheduled to go Monday to Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific time and 8 p.m. Atlantic time. Is 7 p.m. Eastern time. And you can find them on my YouTube channel, on Facebook, and now on Twitter too. Thank you very much again. Thanks for being here. I'll see you later. Bye. And if there's any comments, if there's anything you want to say, please send them to me. To do these things better, if there are topics, issues that you want us to talk about, please send it my way. Thank you. Bye.